Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the next episode of the Emergence Show. I'm Nico Farah, your host. I'm a creative technologist. I empower brands and creators in the future of internet, which is spatial computing, AI, and the gaming world. And today's episode is about latest and greatest in the gaming and community building. We want to explore the transformative power of community in this digital age. We know how this world is evolving towards a spatial computing, AR, VR, XR, and we don't want to miss the very important factor, which is the human connection. And the gaming industry is a really good example. They have driven engagement and loyalty from their users by establishing these really authentic communities. And today we have a great special guest who is a seasoned expert in harnessing the power of community to fuel business growth and innovation. And we will be talking about how we can take these lessons from gaming, virtual worlds, and apply it to spatial computing and all the future of internet brings to us. And we will be giving you guys actionable strategies so you can apply it and build meaningful relationships with your audience. So I will let our amazing guest, Maura, introduce herself and we get started soon.
Thanks, Nico. It's wonderful to be here with you, and I'm super excited to talk about where we're heading and where we've been with the world of spatial computing and virtual digital communities. So I've been working in community-driven marketing for over the 15 plus years, starting back when the technologies were really, really new, and we were, and that kind of opened up the opportunities to do these sort of multiplayer digital experiences in 3D and 2D. And my focus has always been, as head of marketing for these kinds of organizations, around fostering community, and doing that on social platforms, gaming platforms, and working brands into the mix. Most recently, I was VP of marketing for Together Labs, where we had old school metaverse platform called IMVU or IMVU. About 4 million monthly active users, to give you a sense of scale. During the pandemic, it was a lot more than that, which was interesting. And there we successfully launched a Web3 economy on the platform while I was there, as well as introducing influencers as a way of driving growth, and also a lot of brand activations, which was really great. Prior to that I was in a different kind of community, a social platform called TripAdvisor, maybe you've used to plan your trips. And there I was really instrumental in helping to create a new part of the website and apps that introduced global travelers to influencers and formed a community to share information about travel. And then back in the beginning of virtual spaces, I worked at a company called WeeWold and helped to found that company and the virtual world that we created, which became a top 10 social world at the time, and produced millions of teens and tweens to each other, as well as music labels, all kinds of celebrities, etc. So that's kind of my background, what I bring to the table.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I've been familiar with IMVU and the great work that you have done, and that's how we got to know each other. So I appreciate you being here with me. Before we get started, I want to let our audience know that you guys can communicate with us through the comment section. We can see it. I'm also putting a link to our our newsletters where you guys can stay in touch with a lot of information that we share. And if there is any question you guys have, any insights you want to share as we go through the topics, feel free to put it in the comment section. All right, so let's talk about why community is important first of all. Why does it matter? Why gaming tapped into that to drive engagement and growth?
Yeah, I think community is the core of everything. It's funny, even as a marketer, I think marketing is morphing into community. I mean, it's really all about developing and enriching communities. So let's talk a little bit about, like you said, why it matters. The first thing is that humans are wired for connection, right?
Mm.
And there are just countless studies out there that show that friendships and human connections actually make you happier, healthier. They make you live longer. You can actually even earn more if you have better friendships.
Nice.
Um, Even loose connections, like talking to somebody at the coffee shop, is going to improve your mental state. And I think that having a community that's healthy in your real life as well as your digital life, which is now part of our lives all the time, is
Yes.
just part of the way that we have healthy lifestyles and move on it. Which is interesting because we're just coming out of the social computing revolution. Shouldn't we all be so socialized and connected? And yet, oddly, we're not. We're actually less connected.
Mm.
And these so-called social apps are really not helping us as humans. And Nico, you and I've talked about this so much, but especially young people are having increasing issues with loneliness and isolation. And
Yes.
social apps are just not optimized for authentic connection. They're all about passive scrolling, living your perfect life online and no interaction live with people one on one. This is not good for humans. That actually taps into our survival instincts, our fight and flight instincts,
And
primarily
compare
through,
ourselves with
yeah,
others, right? That
and
is
we
not.
compare each other. We go into comparison. There's envy involved. There's we're also trained into these instant dopamine releases where it's constant checking of these superficial notifications, just
How
triggering us.
many likes I got, how many shares. Yes.
Exactly. And that's just not the way it creates polarization for us. It creates these echo chambers as well, where we're sorted by algorithms into various buckets. Um, Also, it's a lot of information overload and desensitization, which is not good. There's so much coming at us all the time, and we're being triggered all the time to look at it. And after
Right.
a while, you just kind of give up and you're not actually thinking deeply. Um,
Mhm.
all that paired with reduced, face to face is not good. So I'm really excited to be here talking with you because I think the future is really all about digital spatial environments that actually help us thrive as people. And we use these spatial environments to have the kind of conversations, even that we're having right now, right? We're in kind of a Zoom like environment, but we're talking to each other in real time in all of the in the moment, sometimes awkward, sometimes great, real time interactions that we have that we need more of.
I love that. I want to actually double click on what you just said. I don't know if you guys watch Dr. Huberman podcast. He's a great neurologist, and he had a guest that was talking about this loneliness epidemic and how social media impacts that or not. And one thing that she mentioned is exactly what you just said, that the real time interaction is what actually gives us the real connection.
Right.
When we get on social media, those async communication, even if it's through DMs, it doesn't feel like a real engagement. And what we have now with spatial computing or so-called metaverse, it's this real-time activities that we feel is much more closer to what we are used to in real life. So that's a great opportunity, and hopefully it will help with lowering the challenges with loneliness.
Yeah, totally. And I think why it came out of gaming so much, if you think about the social experience you have on, say, a TikTok or an Instagram, and the social experience you have playing Fortnite or a video game where you're a
Right.
character wandering around in the 3D world, it's
Yes.
it's more social to be in a game than it is to be on quote social apps. So I think gaming and the industry has always really understood the importance of community because it is ultimately a social experience to go out there and work to solve a puzzle or to win a campaign or to collaborate. It's that side by side behaviors with other humans that really is empowering and sticks with us.
And even if it's not a multiplayer game, the single player games have always used the forums, the guilds,
That's
different
right.
ways to interact and talk about what they're passionate about. They role play, they
That's
do
right.
all those things that it still gives them this sense of belonging. And
That's
that
right.
sense of belonging is the solution to a lot of challenges. And what's interesting is that a lot of these folks that are playing games routinely, they're actually, potentially not engaged in physical activities as much for, being an introvert, or not just, feeling isolated for other reasons and judgments that are happening to them, like the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
But this is an opportunity. This is really a position where they can feel safe and feel belonged. So it's amazing.
Belonging is the most important word, really, for us. That's what we need to feel
Yeah.
safe. Also, what makes us feel sort of okay in the world.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate you touching on the importance of community. So let's think about what are some of the principles that gaming has figured out to foster community. Like, what were you looking for when you are, let's say, starting a new gaming platform and you
Yeah.
want to focus on engagement and loyalty? What are the elements that you look for?
Yeah, and I think here what's important to remember is like for every game that you play, there's something called a core loop to the game.
Mm.
And in a game loop, you like, let's say you're exploring in the game, or you're encountering an enemy in the game, or you have to capture something or collect something along the way. This is
Right.
part of a loop. And at every part of that loop, as you explore, encounter, collect, you level up, right? There's an upgrade, there's a loop that happens. And when you have that sort of success, it makes you want to go back and explore and do the next level and do the next one and the next one. So
Right.
these loops are core to games,
Mm.
and they're well understood as what it is. Like in an RPG, right? You go from action to defeating enemies to a reward to leveling up. You're playing a puzzle, you're exploring what happens in the puzzle, then you have to solve it, then you unlock new areas and move. So a core social loop, you can actually sort of quote gamify social loops, and it's a similar construct. So the action that you take in a social loop is chat. Maybe you're talking about your favorite music or products or interests that you share, or celebrities, right? A lot of things are around celebs these days. Um, so what you're having is a shared experience with other people in a live environment, in a social environment. You might
Right.
do activities together, because
Yes.
once you have the chat and you do some shared activities, think of what you do in your real life. Maybe you go
Mm.
out dancing in a virtual space, you can dance, you can watch
Yes.
videos together, you can play trivia games, you can solve a challenge together. Uh,
Hmm.
the platforms I've worked on, we had escape rooms, which were great ways for people to have shared experiences. And ultimately, that leads in the social loop to rewards and recognition, right?
Mm.
In a social loop, you may unlock special offers.
Right.
You may unlock exclusive items that you can use as part of your avatar or your gameplay.
Right.
Discounts. You could have leaderboards involved and rank upward. Well, I've even worked where we have rewards that I can give a kudo to you if I appreciate what you just did. And that
Yeah.
is a way of providing these rewards and
Like the karma we have in Reddit, right?
exactly, exactly. And I think ultimately those kudos and that recognition levels up your status and
Mm.
your standing in the community. So
Right.
if you think about games and community dynamics, you want to always in a digital platform, because it's not like we can read each other's facial cues all the time. We can't do all those things. You have to be a little overt about making sure that people feel welcomed, belong, comfortable, um,
Right.
so that they can disclose and share with each other, because it's that sharing that actually opens up the community.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, these are very interesting. Like, we talk about gamification, and we talked about it in other episodes. It doesn't necessarily mean use a game engine, but these principles that you just touched on are applicable to everything in life and in business. And we see like social media is trying to incorporate some of those. We see brands doing that in their activation, whether it's physical or digital, and even our human body. Like, we are gamified to do what we have to do. with dopamine and other incentives. So really cool that these are working. And so in terms of authenticity and like the ethical consideration of that, can you tell us more, like when we talk about, these incentives and stuff like that, it could be potentially artificial too.
Right.
How do you go about, making sure everything is authentic, and, kind of the good values are in place when we are establishing these principles?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot. Inauthenticity, you can sniff it out, right? Very easily. We as humans,
Especially gamers.
you can like catch it in the same way that
Yeah.
like an ad that is overselling you or something is like so inauthentic. You're like, yeah, no, I'm not dealing with that. So it's even more so in a shared digital environment where you're involved with other people, and especially in a community, because the thing about communities is that they're tight. So the game that you've developed or the platform that you have or the platform that you want to sell your brand into or whatever it is, this is not, it's not my game that I've developed. It's not my platform. It's the community's platform and they own it. The sense of ownership is intense. If you've been a part of Discord, even just owning your Discord channel is like huge. Like nobody comes into your Discord channel and behave, you set the rules, you figure it out. It's your world. So ownership is a key function. You have to respect the fact that the people that are in this community own the community in their minds, right? And you need to treat them as such. So super important that there are ongoing dialogues so that the platform owners can communicate freely back and forth with the community and make sure that they're in sync. That's why always on Discord servers are so important, or private chats where you can share information, or as you co-develop the product, right? So the other thing that's really important about communities is that they feel a sense of ownership and also co-creation. We'll talk a little bit about that probably a little bit later, but co-creation and community go hand in hand, and it gets back to that ownership model. Communication is key. The reason why people are involved in social platforms is because they're being social, and communication is the baseline of that. I have a good example. When we were on IMVU, we were introducing Vcoin, which is a new token into the platform, because we noticed in the community that there were people that were doing jobs for each other, right? And so it was maybe they were officiating a wedding, or they were a stylist for somebody who didn't know how to dress their avatars appropriately, whatever it was. And we wanted to create a currency that was available peer-to-peer between our users so that they could safely transact on these sort of non-virtual goods transactions. So we actually did this by introducing something new onto the platform, which is always met with resistance. Every time something new comes on board, people are excited or they're worried. But we did it by highlighting what it would give to the community. And we worked within the always-on channels that we had to talk with our community. We made sure that we made some of the early adopters of these things very famous and really use them as a way of showcasing what we did. So communication introduced into a community is super important.
That's such a good point. In our previous episode, Philip and I talked about, how brands can partner with gaming platforms like Fortnite, Roblox, and many good points that you just mentioned. We talked about how, this ownership or this sense of like, this is what we have been building, and now you as an outsider brand, you want to partner, you have to really respect all the rules, all the guidelines, all the, the story and everything that they're doing. So that's such a good point on that front. And the communication and co-creation is also important. Like we noticed like how when I was looking at like the good activation and Fortnite, they have tried to like go to Discord, talk to these people, try to build this relationship before actually coming up with these ideas. And that's how it becomes successful, because ultimately who's going to play it? It's going to be the same community. And so that's very interesting. I would love to know more about your experiences in the past related to all of this. But before that, when we talk about ownership, this is a little bit side comment, but like my interaction with the gaming community has been they're not such a fan of Web3.
No.
And I think that Web3 is basically trying to bring up concepts that they already knew for so long and were working on, and it was established for them. But at the same time, the Web3 folks think that, we're introducing ownership in our, equitable way and on the blockchain and stuff like that. So I'm curious, what has your experience been, especially the fact that you guys have tried to incorporate Web3 into the previous platform that you worked with?
Yeah, it was fascinating. And we were in the middle when we were introducing a full blockchain economy, including appreciable tokens and NFTs and all kinds of things. It was a long-term project. It's non-trivial to introduce blockchain into an existing virtual economy. So we were doing something really unique. And what I would say about it is we started on the communications and marketing side, we started probably a year before we were launched.
Wow.
And what we did was we started educating the communities. So the first call that went out was, hey, let's have a conversation in our channels about blockchain or about NFTs. What do people think? And we got some detractors and we got some supporters. And then for those that were in both of those camps, we made sure that we did special invites to a beta group that represented both sides of that spectrum. And so what we did was we would run the messaging that we were using by them. We would explain to them in a smaller group setting why we were doing it, and that we were doing it because we felt like it would benefit the community around ownership and give them a new form give our creator community, we had over 200,000 creators on IMVU, give them a new opportunity to earn and have ownership. And then the rest of the 4 million users that come to the platform every day, if they purchase an NFT, they can actually resell it. So it was like having the time in the communications channel to explain what actually is a kind of a complex process to them, really, really helped. And the results that we had, because we started early, worked with them throughout. And by the time we had message tested all of the things that we had talked about, we actually had a crew of like 100 people that became the evangelists for the launch.
Wow.
So by the time that we launched the product, it was almost a non-event. It was, people knew it was coming. We had pre-announced, we had done a lot of work. You don't want to come into any community with a big shift or a new brand without some pre-work, because this is their world. And they're very, very protective of it. And if you're running a creator community, this is their livelihood. People will lose money if you make changes, or they'll worry that they'll lose money.
That's such a good point. So this idea of building public that Web3 is trying to incorporate is basically, again, coming from gaming. Without building in public, without incorporating them into the narrative and their decisions, their thoughts, their feedback, things can go wrong. So that's such a good point. And I would love to learn more about the other experiences. Philip has a question. Would you say that social recognition, game mechanics would be more amplified with, I don't see the rest of the comment. Philip, if you want to send us the full comment, that would be helpful. The challenges of within a considering, you said earlier about social interaction and its importance in constructing gaming mechanics, and how, and now that we are touching blockchain, how do you see DAOs playing a role?
Right. DAOs are a whole other form of self-governance, right? And Nico, you run a fashion DAO, so you are probably best to speak to this. But all I can say is I have not gotten to that level of community engagement techniques, because one thing that I know, having come up through the platforms I've worked on, is people want ownership, but they don't necessarily want true ownership. It's more of a representative democracy kind of situation where People want to have input. They want to feel heard. They want to feel
Yeah.
seen. They want to make sure they belong to this community and they're important. But they're not necessarily going to put the hours in
Yeah.
to. There's only a few people that will put the hours in to be a moderator or calling meetings or getting gatherings together.
Mm-hmm.
In a community, when you're in a virtual world community that's all about social, like IMVU is, there are certain people that we called hosts, and those are people that love to host events or love to host, movie nights or whatever it is. And
Right.
and that is a very small segment of the overall society. It's sort of like creators. Creators are usually 1 to 2% of a online community, sometimes up to 3%. Hosts
Yes.
are maybe 3 to 5% of users. If you think about your normal life, there are people that want to run things, and there are people that like to participate in things.
Yes.
And the running things folks is just a smaller group.
Yes, that's very aligned with the experience that we had. What it takes to get to the real decentralization is that feeling of ownership of tasks
Right.
and not just the ownership of outcomes. And I think that was a huge understanding. And the fact that, again, people love to be part of something bigger and something that is aligned with their values and mission and vision. But they are also very much used to this traditional systems of hierarchy and being told what to do or being paid in a very clear manner and stuff like that. But again, similar to the real world, what percent of people are entrepreneurs? Similarly, what percent of people are going to be creators in this virtual worlds? I think creators are basically entrepreneurs. And so those are the people that have leadership skills and leadership capabilities and self-driven and able to take ownership. And if you find those within your community, then do everything you can to empower them, because those are extensions of your team that then you can potentially hire them and empower them. We actually experienced that with one of the communities that we built, Queendom. We basically hired our moderators from the community, and how they were so engaged already. And I've seen that a lot in other Discord platforms. I think
huge. Volunteers are absolutely huge, which is different than running a DAO, which is much more of a decentralized, autonomous organization. I think that's what they both all stands for, right? So that is like different than you're in a construct in a community with rules already, and you've decided to volunteer for a specific task. Volunteer communities are absolutely huge in any community of any kind. There's also volunteers in games all the time, run moderation, or folks that will donate their time to help people pull through various tasks. It's interesting. So I think you're right that these volunteers are. We were hiring people all the time on IMVU to help us various campaigns. There's a lot of that. Yeah.
What's interesting is I think transitioning from volunteering to actual, paid and recognition. And a lot of times these folks want that. And that's why, with the Fashion DAO, we were very much focused on giving the credit and giving them equitable compensation. Otherwise, it becomes challenging for them to continue doing what they love and dedicate. I actually wrote an article from the news that just came out about Reddit and how they're selling the data of user-generated content on Reddit. And volunteers on Reddit don't get paid. They don't necessarily get anything that they deserve. And so that's kind of a questionable act that happened. And then Philip is just having a comment, governance, passing the buck, and the tragedy of the commons. I was thinking more along the lines of quantifying and recording achievements, interactions within a blockchain and mediated via the DAO, as in the community, as a way of keeping social capital immutable, especially in light of online cheating and how gamers are skeptical of leaderboards. What are your thoughts on that, Maura?
So, yes, I think you could probably try to do that through the blockchain. it's interesting in gaming specifically, there's such distrust of blockchains as well. So there's always a certain amount. It's funny because we call it gaming the system. So there's a lot of gaming the system in games, period. There always is. And can you take the blockchain and know that somebody's actually earned this thing or have this achievement, all of that stuff? I think you can. And there are games that are doing that and can be very powerful. I think it doesn't necessarily mean that it like absolutely will solve the problem, because people will decide it's another form of unfairness potentially. But I like that it is a bit less like the platform decided who to put in the leaderboard. I think there's people that think the system is skewed. I know in many communities I've been in, there's like a constant refrain around, you're always featuring these users and not these users, and feeling like slighted by that. So that can be part of the community dynamic as well.
And that's very interesting. The fact that we don't know, I mean, talking about social media along the side of this, we don't really know what the algorithm is behind a lot of these decisions. And you shared a great article yesterday about how Amazon, Amazon affiliate program works, and how these folks are concerned as creators, how these decisions are made. How do I get qualified or disqualified? Stuff like that. And then I was talking to Philip about like, why is that these kind of platforms are not sharing their algorithm? I think one is because of business, like they just don't want to share all the secrets for the competition. And then the other thing is like people are gonna start, finding holes into it, like like, oh, why are you doing it this way? Why are you not doing it that way? So
it's too much information. Almost always, it's too much information to share, because there's a lot of reasons why algorithms are made the way they are. And this is what's really going to be challenging about AI. I sit on the board of the OASIS Consortium, where we're setting standards for trust and safety in digital environments, right? AI is the next big, and we're all in the middle of this revolution that AI is bringing us. And one of the biggest issues that we're going to face, or that we already are facing, is once you can't know exactly what the algorithm is, because it's a machine learning, self-taught kind of moving dynamic, you have to have very clear guidelines and ethics around how you actually use the large language models that learn all of these things. There's a lot of new standards that need to be developed. And we're trying to actually right now write the recommendations around what we should do, knowing what we know now about AI. What should we, as folks that might run platforms, dating platforms, social platforms, do as best practices? Because I think we're going to need to continue that dialogue throughout from now until forever, now that we have these trainable models.
Yeah, it is challenging in AI, in gaming, in social media, like how these algorithms are chosen. It's also experimental, right? Like anything else in marketing, I mean, technology can be the same. Like they're constantly experimenting new directions and seeing what works and what doesn't, and iterating. And if they are too open about it, they are going to spend a lot of resources constantly sharing why. And as Philip said, it also increases liability with the current regulations that we have, like around blockchain, for example. We were talking about how we were going to empower these creators, and everybody loves the power of blockchain for doing that because it's more transparent, more equitable. But at the same time, what are we going to do with all these regulations in the US? So a lot of things are still being figured out. And another point about sharing too much, I think it's a little bit a fine balance. Like you want to build in public, but you don't want to like be too transparent, because then a lot of questions arise. So
it slows you down, which is one of the things that is really tricky. It's you're in business, you've got a certain amount of run rate, and if you need to hit these release goals, it's very hard to like just stop, have a big conversation. It's just not efficient, which is why we actually have to have guidelines and best practices and trust in these institutions. and also why the governments across the world are starting to step in, because it's not always, if everything is only run by whatever makes the most money for the biggest companies, it's not going to be equitable. So we have to have what's ultimately best for society, which you want all of the big companies to also be building things that are great for society. But then again, we have big tobacco and all kinds of things. So we know that that can go awry. Or Facebook, right? Yeah. So like, what are we doing to sort of set these guidelines, and what can governments do in the same way that they regulate, say, automobiles? Like there should be some high level, I could go on it, that's a whole separate session on how best to government regulation could intersect with the business sector, because you can also stymie growth and all kinds of things if they do it the wrong way.
Yeah, and just to wrap this part of the conversation, I think there's a really fine line about, setting these guidelines and values and establishing the trust throughout the core team. That's Again, we realize when you over decentralize, and then you are not going to get anything done. Like you said, I don't see any tech company that has been successful doing everything decentralized, because the decision-making power is going to take forever, and not everybody is qualified to make the right decisions. Right. So it's a fine balance between, hearing the community, getting them involved, but also having the core team, having the strong experts to actually get things done, and the trust that needs to be established for these to be able to do their job properly. Awesome. So let's talk about a little bit of your past experiences, tactics around community engagement that you had in IMVU, WeeWold, and TripAdvisor.
Yeah, I thought it would be helpful to share, like, because it's interesting, whenever I go into conversations around community, a lot of people are like, well, that's great, we should all like have better community, but how what is the actual KPI that I can tie that back to?
Right.
Are you sure that having a strong community is really going to result in more revenue or more time spent, or whatever those things are that are really focused on growing your business? And the answer is yeah, it's super important. One example I can use from TripAdvisor is that when we launched the social feed, I mean, if you've worked with TripAdvisor, you know about the reviews, and it's crowdsourced, wisdom of the crowds for every hotel and restaurant on the planet. And what's interesting is that there are many factors that go into decision-making for where to stay. And a lot of it is working with your friends, but also influencers have a place. And so does the industry. And so what we did was we basically created a Facebook style feed that allowed you to set up your account, whether you were a proprietor, a business, an influencer. So we worked with brands, and actually we were working with Anthony Bourdain in depth and in his team to do that. But ultimately, when we launched the feed, it really helped to deepen the engagement. And most importantly for the business, the KPI that really meant is that the 7-day return rates increased. Because if you think about how often you go to travel, it's not very often in a year. Maybe you're doing it 2-3 times a year. So giving you a reason to come back is something really important. And so that really helped to drive an increase in 7-day repeat rates and more loyalty on the platform, which resulted also in a lot more new member signups. So they could create these inputs. So those are just examples of how community can really fuel growth. On IMVU, if I thought about like some growth metrics around our creator community, I said we had 200,000 active creators. So how do we make sure that the creators are happy and make more money? And what can we do to help them to earn the money? Because ultimately it's a business that we're all in together supporting them. And what we did was we showcased their work. We gave them tools that they themselves could use to promote their work. And then we found ways to showcase that in carousels on the platform. The overall, on average, we lifted creator revenue by about 30% once they were featured. And we 4x'd community engagement around their content, right? Relative to the stuff that maybe we would have done elsewhere. It was less creator focused, more team focused kind of thing. And then I'll say that we've done a number of brand integrations on IMVU. And on IMVU, I would say we worked, and I think you and I have known each other since then, when worked with Pussy Riot, Nadia Tolokonnikova from Pussy Riot, launched an entire community on our platform. We did a number of things. We also were involved in the very first runway show. Vogue magazine called it that. We like partnered between real life designers. We partnered them up with our creators so that they could create new and never been done before virtual fashions. And then we had a runway show. And what I found, the KPI that came out of that, it definitely reinvigorated the community. We sold items from the fashion show and from Nadia's collection, which ultimately, in that case, for Pussy Riot, we were actually donating the proceeds.
Nice.
So some of the KPIs for that were growth in virtual goods sales, but it was also just community engagement. How many hundreds of thousands of people were touched by the campaign? And then ultimately, it was really good for our business. So if you're running one of these businesses, we garnered literally over the course of 2.5 years, billions of earned media impressions for doing these brand integrations. So that matters, because as your company is growing and trying to gain investment or trying to build the next brand integration and gain more users, that's important. And then I can go all the way back to WeeWold, where I did a number of brand integrations. My claim to fame is I had the last free deal from Justin Bieber. But we did, it was a cartoon virtual world, and we worked with Justin Bieber and Bruno Mars and Justin Timberlake and of course Snoop Dogg. But what we would do is we would launch whole collections of them, and we would give away some of the fashions, and then we would sell some of the fashions as well as decor. We did a really interesting one with Herbal Essence, Procter & Gamble, Herbal Essences, and CoverGirl. And we had literally tens of millions of impressions for the assets that were given away, and multiplied the impressions that could have happened relative to, like, say, a banner ad. It was just a completely different scenario. And I can say that we did pre and post survey measurements, which is another way to gauge KPIs. And we indicated like significant lift in aided and unaided brand recall for Herbal Essences and CoverGirl, as well as favorability toward the brand and purchase intent. So community matters. It's possible to measure it, and it depends on what your goals are as a company to determine which KPIs you're going to focus on.
Yeah, that's really good point. In our previous episode, we talked about KPIs briefly. I love that you really expanded on it with some examples and case studies, because to every brand, it's different.
Yep.
And a lot of companies that are partnering with Roblox, for example, they don't necessarily want to like sell their physical items. They're going more for brand awareness and engagement, and just like getting this younger generation prepped for when they grow up and they're willing to purchase those luxury items and beyond. But for certain brands, it actually can be converted to transactions. So that's beautifully said. And I think the element of cross-pollination of communities is very, very valuable. You told me before that some of these communities have stayed, in your platform after, for example, I think it was Justin Bieber's concert.
Bieber bubble. Those people stayed with us for a long time.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That just says like, it's a great brand awareness for the platforms at the same time as, the partners that are coming in. That's really helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And before we go to more actionable strategies, I have a question about like, where do you engage with the community? I mean, you briefly mentioned the TripAdvisor. You created a feed similar to Facebook, and obviously there's Discord and some like custom forums. What have you found most helpful based on your experience in all these platforms?
So traditional forums is what I've used a lot in the past, but I feel like Discord is really taking the place of all of those methods. And in fact, we were in the middle of migrating almost everything to Discord on IMVU when I left there in the fall. So I think Discord is uniquely qualified because within Discord, there's interesting ways of managing access. And also some potential for growth. We were experimenting with that a little bit. where you could get people to understand your community coming in from other like-minded Discord communities, which I think is potential. But the reason why we did it is that it's fairly easy to set up roles in the Discord community, right? So that the community can help maintain what ends up being thousands and thousands of conversations and users on the platform at a given time. So I think Discord is super important, and in gaming, Twitch is also another opportunity. We did a lot of when we would have Ask Me Anything or community meetings, we would do it on Twitch. We would live stream it on Twitch, and then have conversations that way.
That's a good input. I mean, but both of these platforms have their own complaints too.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of user experience issues, but also what I found out recently is that the biggest investor in Discord is actually Tencent and Chinese government accessing all of our data, and nothing is encrypted. So that's quite interesting. They're also the biggest investor, I think, in Meta. Very interesting how these are all handled. But, like, we have to come up with better platforms, or this is what we have to deal with.
I agree.
So that's an opportunity for, all the listeners and us to work on it. Okay, let's talk about some actionable strategies for the audience that we have, whether they are a brand or a technology company that is working with brands. What are some of the high-level kind of suggestions and areas that you want them to focus?
Yeah, so remember I talked about ownership. And this is where it links really closely with co-creation. So I would approach everything, if you're moving into a community like a Roblox or like an IMVU or any kind of community at all that's got a lot of folks that have a lot of ownership in there, find a way to involve the community in the activation. So I mentioned that first metaverse fashion show. It was on purpose that paired these avant-garde fashion designers in the real world with our creators, because if we had just brought a bunch of, we worked with Kalina Estrada and Moaloa and a couple of others, folks that are really big in the fashion world. But like if we just plopped them in the middle of the community, it would not have been nearly as impactful.
They wouldn't know what to do.
They wouldn't know what to do, and they would be bumping into each other like, what do we do now? But by pairing them with these famous creators, and we kind of carefully matched them up, we knew like this creator was really good at such and such a thing. And we worked together with them. We actually had a WhatsApp channel. That's another method that we've used to communicate when we're working on projects. We would start have a Slack or a WhatsApp that we could all communicate on. And they collaborated. One of my favorite ones was Kalina Estrada was doing all of these animorphs where they're like clothing that looks like animals.
Wow.
And what's great is when you work in 3D and the metaverse, you're not bound by, the supply chain and physics. So
everything is possible.
Everything's up for grabs. So the fashions were very animated. There was like flying happening on the platform, stuff like that. So she took these, or the Kalina Estrada team took their animorphs and they created this like horse dress, and it was like a horse head, and like it was very interesting. And it was one of my favorite examples of this sort of blending of the offline world and the online world, because these anamorph dress showed up on platform, walked the runway in 3D, and then a few weeks later, it was New York Fashion Week, I think. Was it New York Fashion Week? And somebody came down the runway, it was the Met Gala. So it was Met Gala, and somebody designed by Kalina Estrada had a version of this horse dress in the real world.
Wow, that's
so cool. It was just like this moment where we were like, see, now there's an online trend that has jumped out of the metaverse and moved onto the runway in the real world. So I think that as a brand, that's always one of my favorite examples, because it's like, I know when you read Brand 101, especially 20 years ago, it said, don't let anybody mess with your brand. And now it's the opposite. And I think brands are really starting to understand that now, but I would get deep into it. What can you do so that people can play with and own your brand? Because the more ownership they have and the more investment they have in helping you to create something new, the more loyalty and the more trust you're going to have from them for your brand.
And I love this example that, basically physical to virtual, virtual to physical, all happening in a circle. Right. And it's just, when we are not bound by physics, then we can be more creative. That's then when you're more creative, you'll be surprised how that can be translated again into the physical world. So it's just, I always say, like, these tech solutions seems a little bit scary. Oh, they're going to take on jobs. But these are opportunities for us to be more creative. That's how Sora is allowing us to have these videos created or 3D assets created much faster. That just means you can accelerate your creativity. That's, like with Midjourney and everything else. Like, I personally find it so much easier. Previously, I had to spend a lot more time to get an idea to a presentable face, but now it's just all possible. So I think for creative people, it's the best opportunity.
I completely agree. And it's natural to be nervous about new things when they arrive, but I do think it helps to expand creativity. And I also think people need to, I'm always preaching around the real world and the virtual space and the digital space are not different. They're actually just different manifestations of our realities that we are all living. I don't think now any of us can separate our digital lives from our real lives. Not anymore. We could have probably, if you roll the clock way back when social was not as big as it is. But now everything happens. We have our phones. Everything is happening in both spaces at the same time. So anytime something new comes into the digital space, it will influence the real world space. And we have to be really mindful of that because sometimes it's for the good, sometimes it's for the bad, but it needs to be part of the conversation all the time.
I love that. And that's a good segue to talk about the future of all of this.
Yeah.
How do you see, with these developments of technology in spatial computing, AI, and so on, how this community building is going to change, how this engagement and loyalty that brands need to build is going to change?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit, I think we need to redefine what we mean when we say social, because social media has really messed up our visualization of what community or socialness is. And I think new generations, like, do not share don't put everything on Facebook or Instagram. I mean, they have like a different outlook on that, having been raised in a digital environment 100% of the time. So I think we're going to get smarter, but then again, AI is going to come in and it's going to change everything. And we're just going to constantly need to be thinking about the shifting perspectives that we need to have about how the digital and real world are colliding and how we're co-inventing across both. And I think as long as we continue to keep both sides in mind and stay out in front of it as much as possible. And I'm happy to see that some of that is happening in AI, and stay positive to humane tech. Like, I actually think that's where some of our government regulations could help us, where you have, like, the things that actually hijack our worst impulses are not the things that we need in automated situations like algorithms. For example, if you Google guns, you should not get more guns back into your feed. Like there's just really simple things, that we could they're not that simple, but we need to dive into the minutia there and think about what we would do. So I think that's some of the stuff in the future. And then ultimately, I think the trend of the digital and the real world coming together just means that authenticity is even more important. And I think we're going to be challenged with AI because what constitutes authenticity is going to be difficult to maybe piece apart. But augmented AI, things that augment human creativity, can't be all bad, but we're heading into new territory here. It's going to be a really fascinating ride from here on out.
Yeah, I love that. I think, as you said, the younger generation, even though they grow up with the technology, they still have their boundaries. They still respect, and they want to have these physical interactions. So if you're building a brand for the future, a platform for the future, we have to keep all of this in mind and respect them, similar to what we talked about in the gaming world. And I love that you touched on that example of like how these algorithms can go wrong. When you are like, it's funny, like on TikTok live feed, I was looking at some of these very weird examples of content, and I was just watching it just because I was so surprised that it's
Yeah.
happening. But then I got more and more of that, which I wasn't interested at all. That was just curiosity in the beginning, but then it turned out to be my whole feed.
Right.
But I see that, slowly these platforms are realizing that it's not necessarily everything you like or view doesn't necessarily mean you love to see more of.
Right.
So there's a lot that needs to be incorporated into the algorithm and into the engagement metrics and factors that we can learn from. And yeah, I mean, in the future, I would love to, we have like 5 minutes. I would love to hear from you about the work that you're doing around setting the standards and safety, because it's very relevant to this future that we're talking about. If there's anything you would like to share with us.
Yeah, I think it's like any kind of standard. I think you need to not lock it down so hard that you can't get good things out of it, right?
Right.
This is true for communities around trust and safety in general. So you
Right.
need to have a strong set of community guidelines for what's acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and then you need to be very consistent in applying those guidelines, which is work, right? You actually have to take the time to
Yeah.
do that. You have to staff your trust and safety organizations. You have to pay attention to how it's looked at in the company. Does the executive team understand how important it is? Do they ask for the KPIs coming out of trust and safety? Does the board have representation to understand how important this is? Okay, that's important just for regular digital trust and safety. Now we layer AI into it, and AI takes it to the next level of complexity, because what large language models are we using? What are we training our models on? What types of information and data is being used of ours to inform the experience and also create content that I might not understand or know that it's even out there? And so one of the things that I'm really passionate about is making sure that we don't just make this a problem in the customer support organization.
Yeah.
This needs to be foundational across the company. So it needs to be what the product management team and the development team thinks about every time. So it's like design for, and the Center for Humane Technology has actually done a lot of important work here, along with a lot of other organizations, to think about what are the best practices and how do we design from the ground up for safety and trust and provenance around these large language models. And then what are the ways in which the organization is setting up guardrails and checkpoints so that we can continuously check to see how it's going? And that's complex, and it'll be different for every organization. So the guidelines have to be loose enough to look at all the different types of use cases and not be such a blunt instrument that it chops potential.
Yeah. Because advancement in technology also requires some flexibility in the regulations.
There are risks involved, and some of the best things that have come out of technology come from taking a risk and trying it. So I think it's a balance, but I think it is so important now that it's become such an embedded part of our lives. Look at what's happened with the loneliness epidemic.
Yeah.
We don't know what we're about to launch into, and so this needs to be considered at the highest level. And I can tell you there should be a chief trust officer on most boards, and that should be just endemic to the organization. And I'm a little worried that we've got organizations in chat, GBT and other things where there's the nonprofit worries about the ethics and the profit just rolls. So I think we have to, and we've seen some of the swirl that's creating. So I think we have to work on new ways of working together.
And I think important factor in all of this is diversity in our teams. That, like you said, it shouldn't be just customer support. It has to be ingrained in the organization. And that's what I found when I looked into the gaming industry first, when I stepped into it, that we don't see enough women. We don't see enough non-binary. And so that's why everything is designed so super sexual and, unsafe for a lot of women and non-binary. And so kind of what we need to do is also looking into our hiring, into the collaborations, into even the extension of the team, which is the collaborators within the community. So really good points in there. I appreciate your time, Maura. That was super helpful. And our thank you to our audience for following along. And we will be back next week with continuing our conversations around gaming and spatial computing and how that relates to retail and brand. And thank you again, Maura.
My
Folks,
pleasure, Nico.
yeah, they're going to be reaching out to you on LinkedIn. Is that correct?
Yep.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Take care.
Thanks. Cheers.
Bye.